Being vulnerable can, ironically, be an intense act. Choosing to open oneself up to others, to lay bare your weaknesses, fears, and struggles, a state of being that we typically only reserve for those closest to us, for those we trust the most, to not take advantage of our unguarded state. Yet, what happens when we cannot help but be vulnerable? And what if the stakes of revealing your vulnerability are incredibly high? When those who look to you for resolve or strength suddenly see you at your most exposed. Will they lose faith? Will they lose hope? And yet, how can we not help but feel exposed, naked, or vulnerable when we look out into the vast emptiness of space and realize how small we really are? This is Sacred TREKS.
Space, the final frontier.
We must strive to be more than we are, Law. It does not matter that we will never reach our ultimate goal. The effort yields its own rewards.
It's a matter of interpretation. It may not be what you believe, but that doesn't make it wrong.
There are 3 things to remember about being a starship captain. Keep your shirt tucked in, go down with the ship, and never abandon a member of your crew.
The most profound discoveries are not necessarily beyond that next star. They're within us.
Your father was captain of a starship for 12 minutes. He saved 800 lives. I dare you to do better.
You're Starfleet's captain. You believe in service, sacrifice, compassion, and love.
The needs of the many outweigh
The needs of the few.
or the one.
Welcome to Sacred TREKS, a series where we analyze individual episodes of Star Trek through a specific theme in order to look for lessons on how best to live our lives. Today we'll be looking at the original series episode, The Enemy Within, through the theme of vulnerability. I wanted to look at this episode through vulnerability because I felt like more obvious themes like the duality of humanity or evil hiding within ourselves were themes that had been thoroughly discussed already with this episode elsewhere. And I thought vulnerability presented a new theme that still touched upon the same topics within the episode. Before we get into the episode synopsis, however, I do wish to mention that this episode contains what I find to be one of the biggest, if unintentional by the writers, failures of the entire Star Trek The Original Series. I'm talking specifically about the scene where Yeoman Rand is assaulted and manages to fend off a rape attempt by the imposter Captain Kirk, and then is forced to recount her ordeal directly to the man who she believes assaulted her. However, I've already discussed this scene in another one of my videos, The Women of Star Trek, so I'll direct you to that video if you want to hear my bigger thoughts on that storyline. In this video though, I will be talking about Rand's role in this episode through our theme, but we'll also put aside my more targeted criticisms of how that storyline unfolded. And with that out of the way, let's dive into the synopsis. The crew of the Enterprise finds themselves on a geological expedition, and apparently Shilu has found himself a new best friend. I'm sorry, I know we just started, but this is my favorite alien in all of Star Trek. It's literally like a dog that some poor PA glued a horn on top of, and that dog does not look happy at all about having that horn. It's like the best thing in Trek canon. Who cares about tribbles? Bring back the unicorn dog. Anyways, after Technician Fisher gets covered in yellow dust and beamed back aboard the Enterprise, Scotty begins to have some trouble with the transporter. Damn Fisher and his yellow magnetic dust ore. What was he doing, just like slip and sliding all over the rocks? Scotty then beams back Captain Kirk, who appears weakened by the transport. After leaving the room, a second Captain Kirk, with way more eyeliner, appears. We begin to learn that these two Captain Kirks are vastly different in personality. The quote-unquote good Captain Kirk seems uncertain, unable to make any decisions for himself. The quote-unquote evil Captain Kirk staggers around the Enterprise, even running into sickbay and demanding brandy.
Sorry, I'm brandy.
which McCoy keeps as the literal closest object to the door. What an amazing doctor he is. Evil Kirk also attacks a crewman and human Rand, who scratches him on the face. Rand tells Good Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, who, after discovering that the unicorn dog was also duplicated, realize that there's a duplicate Captain Kirk aboard. Due to the transporter being the cause of all the trouble, the Enterprise can't beam up Sulu and the away team left down on the planet. Kirk lies to the Enterprise crew and says that the duplicate is an imposter, with scratches on his face, and that he should not be harmed.
An imposter aboard the ship. Man who looks exactly like me and is pretending to be me.
All hand phasers must be set on base cycle. Stunning force.
The evil Kirk hears the announcement and he freaks out, yelling,
I'm Captain Kirk!
Proving that Kirk was and always will be the master of dramatic name yelling. Evil Kirk then hides his injuries with makeup, which Captain Kirk apparently also keeps as the closest object to his door. Apparently Kirk really loves the makeup, which I'm not judging or reinforcing gender norms, by the way, because that's actually awesome. A captain always has to look fabulous. Good Kirk and Spock track Evil Kirk down in engineering and capture him. Spock and McCoy realize that both Kirks are slowly dying without the other, with Spock postulating that Kirk has been split into his good, compassionate, yet indecisive side, and his evil, yet more determined side.
His negative side, which you call hostility, lust, violence. And his positive side, which Earth people express as compassion.
Meanwhile, time is slowly running out for the away team as the planet's temperatures start to go down to negative 120 degrees. I mean, if Unicorn Dog Thing can survive on this planet, I think 3 dudes with rock-warming phasers can get by. Scotty tries to fix the transporter, but a test to recombine the 2 unicorn dogs leaves them, I'm not entirely sure what to do with pronouns here. Well, the dog is dead.
He's dead, Jim.
Please no one tell Space PETA. Or that captain from the short treks that Enterprise used animal testing.
I was more concerned with the moral implications.
For the triple? Well, sure. I could, genetically manipulate the DNA to make them all brain damaged.
Spock argues that the animal just died from shock from being recombined.
No autopsy is necessary to know that the animal was terrified, confused. It was split into 2 halves and suddenly thrust back together again. Thus shock.
While McCoy says that if Kirk were to do the test, he'd end up dead just like the dog.
Suppose it wasn't shock, Jim. Suppose death was caused by a transporter malfunction.
Good Kirk, having the worst case of analysis paralysis,
Help me. Somebody. Make the decision.
sits around listening to Sulu slowly dying.
Clearly, Doctor. To read.
Which I'm sure didn't help the William Shatner-George Takei feud. Evil Kirk escapes, then attempts to leave the away team behind in order to escape.
Try to leave order, Mr. Farrell. Well? Captain! I gave you an order, Mr. Farrell.
But Good Kirk eventually returns to the bridge. Evil Kirk breaks down in a moment of weakness and gets a good cry on Captain Kirk's shoulder, as Good Kirk chooses to take the chance with the transporter. Surprise, surprise, everything's fine, and the away team beams back up. Hooray for everybody! Except the unicorn dog, I guess. That thing is still deader than Disco. I mean actual Disco, not Star Trek Discovery. In this episode, Captain Kirk is perhaps at his most vulnerable he has ever been. Vulnerability typically means that we are most exposed to being harmed or hurt. Yet we often also think of being vulnerable as a positive thing. When we let ourselves be vulnerable, we are exposing parts of ourselves that we normally hide deep down inside of us. When we hide parts of ourselves for too long, we are hiding the totality of who we are. We hide these parts of ourselves for many reasons, the biggest of which is a fear that those who see our true selves will reject us, or this more secretive, sensitive part of ourselves. And because our guard is down, because we are showing someone a part of ourselves that we normally hide from criticism, to be rejected would also be a great deal of pain. But by being split in two, Captain Kirk has exposed two raw sides of himself to the world that he normally keeps hidden. On one side, we see a man racked with self-doubt, worry, and fear of doing the wrong thing.
My own indecisiveness growing. My force of will steadily weakening.
We all typically wish to project confidence out into the world. Yet almost all of us experience that nagging doubt, that anxiety that we're making the wrong decision. Yet we rarely talk about our doubts with our coworkers or even friends. We only share our fears with our best friends or family. Yet the side of Kirk also holds his compassion. his caring for others. His doubt often stems from his understanding of how his choices affect those around him, as well as himself. His empathy overrides his ability to choose.
What do I have? You have that goodness. Not enough. I have a ship to command.
On the other side, Kirk's raw passions are exposed. The so-called evil Kirk is driven by lust, desire, and greed. Yet it's also his source of determination, what drives him to overcome his indecision.
Without the negative side, you wouldn't be the captain. You couldn't be, and you know it.
Yet he cares for nothing, arguably not even himself, showcased by him almost shooting the good Kirk.
I don't need you.
Yet I would argue that this side of Kirk is not evil, or man's baser instinct, as Spock implies, but just our sense of will, our id, our need to push forward, to look for more, to do more. Would Kirk still desire to be an explorer without this side of himself? Wouldn't it be overly simplistic to call that side of ourselves just evil? Just as it would be simplistic to say that the indecisive Kirk is simply good. The good Kirk listens to the cries of his away team slowly dying, without an ability to act on it. Some would say that the inaction of good men is perhaps the greatest evil of them all. While certainly the acts of these two Kirks are viewed as good or bad by the episode, and I also don't wish to minimize the horrible act that evil Kirk enacts on Human Rand, I would also say that both Kirks are not simply categorized as good or bad. So what we are left with is not a good or bad Kirk, but two Kirks who are simply exposed emotion. Both of these Kirks represent vulnerable sides of a man that the fully formed Kirk would never show to anybody, except maybe his two closest friends, Spock and McCoy. It's why Kirk only shows these two versions of himself to those two men, hiding away in sickbay for most of the episode. In fact, when Kirk and Spock go to capture the imposter Kirk in engineering, the good Kirk specifically tells Spock he doesn't want anyone to see.
Don't you think we ought to get some help, Captain?
No. I don't want anyone else to see thee.
This mirrors how in our society today, many men are afraid to be vulnerable in front of others. Men are told to bottle up their emotions, to never let anyone in. Yet the stakes for Kirk to show being vulnerable in front of others are high. Kirk is the captain of a starship, and thus cannot have the luxury to be anything less than perfect, as Spock puts it.
It's a good crew. We deserve to know.
Captain, no disrespect intended, but you must surely realize you can't announce the full truth of the crew. You're the captain of this ship. You haven't the right to be vulnerable in the eyes of the crew. You can't afford the luxury of being anything less than perfect. If you do, they lose faith, and you lose command.
It's fitting, perhaps, that Spock reminds Kirk of his need to appear strong for the crew, as Spock himself learned this exact lesson from another first officer on the Enterprise when he came aboard the ship.
I do think one must be aware, however, of how one is perceived by one's comrades. This is the advice I'd give to anyone whose ultimate goal is command. And if you want to command, you're gonna have to learn to keep your freaky to yourself.
And people say that short TREKS episode gave bad advice, and yet loved this episode. If Kirk were to show that he was weakened, his crew may lose faith in their commanding officer. Yet is this actually completely true? As Spock himself showcases as a character who battles between logic and emotion, it's never a good thing to completely hide your emotions, to completely hide a part of yourself. By hiding away all his emotions from his crew, Kirk isolates himself from his decisions. Not being open about his vulnerability had tangible consequences for Rand and Sulu. Kirk sits in sickbay, unable to decide what to do, while his crew suffers down on the planet below. Human Rand apologizes to Kirk at the end of the episode, believing she falsely accused him of assault.
And I'd just like to say that... Well, sir, what I'd like to say is that...
Thank you, Yola.
Yet, the Kirk that did that to her was part of the man she was apologizing to. So it's fitting, perhaps, that Kirk is only able to make the decision to step into the transporter only after his entire bridge crew sees that he has been split in two. All of his crew members see his imposter self on the bridge, crying on his own shoulder. Everyone can see their own captain at his lowest moment, even if they don't understand the full context. Yet it's at this moment of being most vulnerable, of being most exposed to his crew, that Kirk is able to showcase the most bravery, deciding to step into the transporter to save his away team, even if it meant he might die as a result. Baring ourselves to all those around us, to letting ourselves show others what we are scared to show, sometimes leads us to understand that what we feared most wasn't letting others see us, but what we really fear is finally exposing who we really are to ourselves. That's it for Sacred Treks. What did you think about The Enemy Within and the theme of vulnerability? And don't forget to subscribe to not miss any other Sacred Treks or any of my other Star Trek or sci-fi videos. And if you want to help make these videos even better or want to join the community, consider giving to my Patreon page just like these amazing folks did. And special thanks to my commander level and above Patreons, Stephen Schuhart, Michael McGee, Maggie Evans, Lal Lindley, Wellington Marcus, Munir Amlani, and BBD. But regardless of if you subscribe or give to my Patreon, I hope that all of you, as always, live long and prosper.